And now they're faced with a situation to where they need to make decisions that are either going to save their lives, save someone else's life, and they're just freezing. I've seen it.
Hey, get an ambulance out here. And they take him and he's no longer with us or whoever. At least you did everything correctly.
118, so this is my family alone. I can't copy. I want family alone. We got crews coming.
Welcome back to Surviving the Street, where policing meets personal growth, tough conversations, and partially filtered stories of real events. How was that? It's pretty good.
Yeah, no, that's not bad.
I just made that up last night with a little bit of help from my wife, trying to figure out a slogan to say at the beginning, and I feel like that's pretty good. Kind of hits everything. So on this podcast, episode 9, we're going to talk about some case law, which I know is not usually very exciting.
No, it's pretty dry.
And more particularly, Graham v. Conor, which is really important because I think that that's probably the one case law that gets the most attention nowadays.
Yeah, I would agree. Just about any use of force, has to do with that.
Yeah. And, I mean, if somebody, fruit of the poisonous tree doctrine and recovers some evidence that, was obtained illegally and your case gets thrown out, doesn't really make the news usually.
No. Well, you'd be surprised how many cases get dismissed for, insufficient evidence or just minor things out in the street that people don't pay attention to.
That's true. And maybe that'll come up later in this conversation too.
Yeah, it's quite possible.
Or another podcast on a different case law.
Yeah.
So the importance of Graham v. Conor is, the standard that officers are judged on based on their use of force and determining whether or not it is justified. And that standard is objective reasonableness. It's important because it is the guiding principle that departments use to develop their policies around use of force and whether or not the force is not necessarily necessary, but appropriate
right
to what's happening. So back in the 1980s, right?
The Wild West.
None of us were around during that time. Yeah. All right. So 40 years ago, in the 80s, 1980, if you go on YouTube and you type in policing in the 1980s, there's going to be several videos that come up. And I was watching them last night. And you should go watch them. If you're listening to this podcast and after you're done or this episode, go listen to them and watch them because it's actually a little bit comforting because all the problems that they were having in 1980, whatever that was, is the same problems we're having today.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that people, definitely us, we're in the now, right? So we think that as officers, like all these issues are new and they're not, right? They've been not necessarily plaguing, but they've been a problem, since the beginning probably of law enforcement in general. We've all been privy to those conversations where you've been around an older officer, I should say.
Oh, yeah.
And they like to, give their input and talk about, well, back in my day, this is what we did, right? And the times that they're talking about usually is pre-body cameras, mm-hmm. right? And they tell their stories or whatever the case is, but there's very few of those people left now, right? I mean, if I look around, there might be, that I know of, maybe 2 or 3 that I'm like physically around.
Well, you can find them. You're just tucked away at a desk somewhere now, hiding from the body cameras.
Yeah.
Hiding from the street.
Yeah, and just maybe they're wiser.
They might be, yeah.
Maybe we're the silly ones.
Yeah, right. Laughing at us, look at all these young guys running around with these body cameras, and like you said, I think a lot of the crime is the same. I think a lot of the key cases are all pretty much the same. It's just evolved with the times, right? Just like we have as law enforcement, new equipment, better equipment. They have some of the same equipment. They got technology just like we do. Social media is a big thing. Cell phones, obviously, there were no cell phones back in the 80s. So as we grew, they grew. So I think we're dealing with the same stuff, just different times.
Yeah, and I think so pretty soon here, in the next 5 to 10 years, there will be, well, when did body cameras actually, for us even, I mean, it was not that long ago. It was like maybe
2015.
Yeah, about 8 years ago or whatever. I think when I first got on, we didn't have them. They were just kind of rolling them out.
Right.
But I think we were behind, right?
I'm not sure about that. Well, I know there's a lot of places, still a lot of departments, especially up north, that don't have body cameras. A lot of the unions fought on that. Then I joined in 18, and we've always had body cameras. So for me, I don't know anything about policing without a body camera. So all the complaints that you hear, oh, they want body camera this, body camera that, I guess I understand it, but it doesn't make any difference to me. Like, I police the exact same way, and I always have. I've maintained that same standard. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly when our department took it.
I think that what I see, just like watching body cameras and looking into cases of use of force incidents that are happening and being able to pick up on whether they're available or whether that person or team or department had a body camera on, it seems like troopers are the holdout. You know, I think doesn't DPS have body cameras now?
DPS does. DPS has our old body cameras, from what I've seen. I think the watch guard. I think that's what they use.
Yeah. And then I think because I think in particular, I've been looking for Georgia State Police.
Man, good luck.
I've been looking for their body cameras and I can't find any, so I presume they don't have any. And then after troopers, it seems like the next holdout of individuals is like SWAT teams or tactical teams.
Right.
I've noticed that, obviously in where we work, every person on the street, every person taking enforcement action, I believe has one, right? But it seems like throughout the country, SWAT teams and tactical teams, and especially narcotics teams, are individuals that don't yet have body cameras, and I feel like they almost learn the hard way, right?
Right. I know a lot of the problems is the storage and the cost to store all those, the cloud, I guess you would call it. So that's what a lot of these departments have trouble with is funding all that. So I can kind of understand why different divisions wouldn't have them. It's most important for patrol, because those are the day-to-day interactions you have, and they can turn at any minute. A lot of the investigators already know what they're going into and going to do. I don't think we'll ever see a time with investigators having body cameras.
Yeah, I don't think they're necessarily.
No,
necessary.
But some of the tactical teams, I would say so. But I could also see why, it might get in the way. If you're a SWAT team or whatever, and you're gonna go serve a warrant, and you gotta get a full kit, like where are you gonna put that thing?
It's definitely something that you have to work around and inconvenience, but eventually you work it out. It's not a big deal. I think that's something that before you get it, you're thinking about. You're like, oh man, and I remember that actually being the case.
Yeah.
Before the team had the cameras. Kind of gripes or whatever, just not necessarily about having to wear cameras, just about like, where are we going to put this thing? And then there's a real issue, even kind of almost still, with making sure it's charged and downloading in batteries, which is kind of like an ongoing thing, really. I don't know that there's necessarily a way around that. But one case in particular, and I remember this coming up when I was doing my research. If you haven't seen my Breonna Taylor YouTube video, you can go look at that. But they talked about, they didn't have body cameras, and even the lead investigator, supervisor in that case, said that if they would have had them, none of that would have happened. Like the not happened in terms of like what happened physically, but the aftermath.
Yeah.
Right, because that would have been cleared up right away.
Well, I think you did the best synopsis of the Breonna Taylor. I watched that video maybe a few hours after you posted it, and just the way you broke it down and everything, it makes for an everyday person to actually understand and follow what actually happened. Because you have one side of the, one side telling people, how bad it was and just bashing law enforcement just because, people hate cops. Then you have the other side that's defending anything the cops do. And with that whole situation, there was no middle ground. There was nobody that was like, okay, hold on a second. Let's really look at what's going on here. And I think you did that best. Because I didn't quite understand everything that had happened up until I watched your video. And it's very clear. And like shooting through a window when you can't see anybody. It's like, what are you doing? You know what I mean? Definitely not acceptable.
Yeah. And actually what's crazy about that, there's a lot of crazy. But, I'm just trying to follow the facts. I don't care where they take us, and I think that's just a missing component of everything that's being done, is just that there's biases on both sides, right? You got the people on the outside looking at something and they don't really know what they're talking about. Let's be honest, right? They didn't do this, they didn't do that. Like, and nobody cares to look at. Well, I know right away we don't have the information, right? But nobody cares to. You can find it all online. I did. I'm a normal person, right? So I found every transcript, every piece of evidence that was collected, where it was tagged, everything, right? So that's all I'm doing is just try to follow the evidence and tell the truth as I see it, and I think that more aligns with what actually happened in specifically in that incident. And I don't think that that whole incident in and of itself is really a story about, you know, it doesn't, what actually happened doesn't fit the story of what actually took place, in my opinion, and why it kind of happened, right? And if you go look at that video if that's what you want to do. But nevertheless, I don't know why people, there's like a conflicting, you know, idea about body cameras for whatever reason.
Right.
And I think, well, every proactive cop likes them, let's be honest.
Right.
I mean, because, you know, you're watching your body camera after you did something, trying to analyze what you did right, what you did wrong, which in and of itself is extremely valuable. Didn't have that back then, you know. I was watching this video from the 80s on YouTube, and the guy's running up with a sledgehammer, hitting a door, and they just, you know, none of them are wearing protective vests or anything, and they're going in there. Everybody sit down, and it's like, the crazy thing about that too is that every person, they're talking to them like they're a suspect, right? They did a drug buy or whatever, and every person, they're having them like empty their pockets and give them the stuff. Take everything out of your pockets and give it to me, and they're like the suspect's just digging around, you know. And so the body cameras, and I know people don't care, like the people that are listening to this understand, and people that don't understand and don't care aren't going to be listening to this probably, but there's probably never been a time in history where not necessarily the standard, but the accountability level has been higher, right? Just because of the mere fact that pretty much everything you do is being recorded.
Oh yeah, you know, and analyzed by multiple different levels. I know our department releases all this for the significant events, you know, officer-involved shootings, death in custodies, and everything. And I don't know of any event where you know you're about to get into a shooting or death in custody, whatever. So, you know, you and I could be in the car, you know, just jaw-jacking and, you know, whatever. But that's going to be released to the public. Or, you know, for internal affairs, I mean, we have audits, right? Once a month, somebody may be watching your camera, or just people just reviewing things like, hey, I heard you had a run-in with this suspect, and I'm investigating that suspect as well. Let me go watch your camera and see what you're doing.
Exactly.
Right? Or let me go watch your camera. Maybe not see what you're doing, but see what that suspect was doing. And then they capture you either doing something you're not supposed to, or saying something you're not supposed to, or it could work in a benefit. You know what I mean? I know I go back and I analyze every use of force video I have, whether it's something as simple as force handcuffing somebody, a vehicle pursuit, a foot chase, anything. I go back and I analyze that. I analyze my partners. I'll watch dash cams, and not to critique other people or anything, but just to make myself better, right? What can I have done better?
Real quick, do you want to go over what the PIT procedure is? Because I've talked about this before on the Instagram, but you know, I think there's definitely a time and a place, and actually there is a time and a place because your policy probably says there is a time and a place. Right. And I think that actually, like, maybe other agencies or whatever maybe don't have a stringent policy, or maybe I would assume they have one. But somebody sent me a video, and I believe it was Georgia State Police again. By the way, I don't not like you guys, you know? And dude, this car is going definitely over 100 miles an hour, probably on the freeway. And, you know, I'm from Northeast Ohio, so I'm going to explain it the way I see the freeway in this video, because it's kind of like the freeways up that way. But the only median is grass, right? So I think it was 2 lanes one way and 2 lanes the other way. And the only thing separating traffic is just grass, right? And maybe a little bit of a divot, you know, like ditch kind of, but not like a full-on ditch. And they're going, I don't know how fast, but it had to be 100, 110, you know, I don't know, fast, right? And, you know, I think he makes contact and tries to pit this truck, and this truck goes into the grass and is still flying, like didn't take his foot off the gas. And he's like, I think he even goes up in oncoming traffic and comes back. And I'm just watching this, and I don't remember if it ended or how it ended. I don't think it ended really necessarily badly, but I'm just like, man, the thought of pitting a vehicle at that speed and causing that vehicle to go into oncoming traffic and hit some family or some, whoever, and definitely probably going to kill him. I just feel like you have to be a man and be like, it's not worth it, and even go, I'm calling this. This is too dangerous.
A pit is a use of force, right? A vehicle pursuit's a use of force. So is it reasonable to pit a vehicle at 100 miles an hour, right? So things you have to take into consideration, this is actually in that case law. This is kind of what the Supreme Court ruled. The totality of the situation, right? Like, what are we chasing him for, right? Is this some sort of aggravated crime? Is he a violent felon? Well, does it make him a violent felon now, doing double the speed limit? Driving that fast, recklessly through traffic. You got to take into consideration all these factors. And pitting somebody at 100 miles an hour, man, that's you better be able to articulate why you did that, right? Why you put, maybe that suspect's life at risk with all these innocent citizens just driving on the freeway, right? Like, why would you do that? Is it worth it? In my opinion, well, probably not. I know our policy is 45 miles an hour, and if you're not supposed to go over that. And it's difficult to no one's pitting and looking at the speedometer as they're right next to the car, going, is it 45, 46? But when you're doing 45 miles an hour, when you're doing 50, 60, but that the difference between that and like 80 miles an hour and whatnot. I think the pit is definitely an effective tool. I think we should do it more, and do it faster. Like, in my pursuit, I didn't give him time. Like, it was less than a minute for sure. Like, I didn't give him the time to put everyone else at risk. But you also got to look at your surroundings as well. Like, is there a bus stop right there? Are there people? Is there a park here? Like, what are we near? What are we doing? Can we stop this before it gets worse? Georgia State Patrol, man, their videos look great. I love watching them, but that's about it, man. Those guys are wild.
Yeah, I think that there is definitely, you can still be that person and have that mentality, where like, you're not going to let people get away, and you're not going to allow criminal activity to happen in your presence. And if you cross our paths and you're doing something you shouldn't be doing, then we're going to make sure that you're held accountable, and do it in a professional way while also still making common sense decisions that are in the best interest of, the citizens, the public, yourself, both from a safety and a liability standpoint. But also, you're talking about, right, in a vehicle pursuit, pretty much always we don't know who's in the car, right? We know there's a driver. We got that part. He's the bad guy, right? Because he's committing a felony, running from the police. And there's this thought I know that exists where officers have this mentality of like, if something bad happens to the people in the car, that's his fault, right? And sure, there is some definitely, he definitely holds the weight of that accountability.
Right.
But we've taken down robbery crews with kids in the vehicle.
Right.
And absolutely, there's been car chases where there's been kids in the vehicle. And it just so happens that a lot of the time, the kids in these vehicles aren't in the proper seating, conditions that they should be in, car seats or whatever, and strapped in.
In which most times you don't know that's the case either, because kids, you can't see them from the back. You're looking through the rear window of a vehicle. You can't see their heads popping up, right? So you don't find out there's kids in this car until after it's stopped, right? Until after they've either crashed, you pit it, they've given up, and then you find out. Oftentimes, we're not going to go chase a car if we know there's kids in the car. I know a lot of people would hear that and think, oh, wow, like we're putting all these kids at risk. Like 9 times out of 10, that's not the case, unless it's a hostage deal or something where we need to stop that car, or a drunk driver or something, But a lot of times we won't chase if there's a kid in the car.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, not only will you not initiate the chase, hopefully you shouldn't do that, but also if a supervisor is aware that there is, you should call it off immediately.
No, I agree. You got to determine the level of force you use. Right. We know this guy just either murdered somebody or potentially, aggravated assault or something. Right. So what amount of force is reasonable to stop this guy from either doing it again or save this woman's life?
I think that's in that particular situation, that's actually kind of a tough, even if, like, say the vehicle drives off, that's a pretty tough decision to make. I don't know if I want to be making that decision, right? Because she's in the back seat, but then the question becomes, is my pit going to, at this speed, going to place her in more danger?
But you're exactly right. Making that decision, like right then and there, like, are your actions going to cause her more harm? Or, what do you do? You know what I mean? That's a hard decision to make.
And again, that is kind of a very particular situation, but in any type of decision making that you do, and whether it's you have time to plan for it and you do it, or you have to do it in an instant, you have to, we'll talk about, being able to articulate or whatever, but as an individual, when you decide to make that decision, you have to have already thought about accepting the outcome, right? That's my opinion. And when the outcome isn't necessarily favorable because of your actions, you have to be able to say, this is the information I had at the time, and I made this decision because of this. And sometimes it doesn't always work out the way that you intend it to, but I think that's important. And the more, experience you get and training that you have, the faster you can make those decisions and understand why you're doing that.
No, I definitely agree. And I think the body cameras in those situations definitely help, especially in court, right? So we talk about the standard after, Graham versus Conor. Is it objectively reasonable, right? What you did at that time, right? Not in hindsight, not, at that time, would a reasonable officer have made the same decision or close to it, right? Now, when you think about these cases, like that one in particular, it's hard to put ourselves in their shoes because there's no video evidence of it. There's probably not even, you probably can't even find a picture to paint, to see in your own mind and put yourself in the officer's shoes to feel what it was like for them. But now we got all this video, or you can just go back and be like, okay, well, what did the officer see, right? And it's a lot different too than some guy, from across the street recording you, or surveillance footage, right? Because we've all seen surveillance footage of officers doing something, and it might not look great, right? But then when you watch their camera, maybe you see that gun, maybe you see that knife tucked away, or maybe you see something different. And I think that's when the body cameras come into play, and I think they're very beneficial to a patrol officer or any officer in a uniform.
I talk about cases that I've critiqued or whatever, and one of the recent ones was the Camden County Sheriff who was behind that vehicle, and, like, to me and you, probably red flags, right? He's not stopping immediately. He's kind of swerving all over the road. He comes to an abrupt stop, and the first thing you do is get out and yell for the guy to get out of the car, and then, like, approach him as he's getting out of the car, like right there face to face. That's not good. And so in your case, very similar in terms of just knowing, hey, this isn't right. Something's going on. And taking that extra second to, okay, hey, yep, I see his hands. Let me come up a little bit. Okay, oh, that's not good. Okay, hey, back up. Hey, step out of the car, because in that moment, that is still safer for you if you can get him to step out. And then realizing that basically this is a rescue now, right?
Exactly.
So you gave him a couple chances to step out on his own. He wasn't doing that. And then you got up there and did what you needed to do, which is, preferred. So if you're listening to that, you should be able to identify these things, identify risk, assess risk. That way you can mitigate potential threats that may be coming your direction. So, we talked about the 1980s and the need for legal standards and evaluating use of force, and something that I didn't realize, which is, again, we're talking about before our time, these things happening in the context of law enforcement that are still happening today, basically, right? So the Rodney King incident, right? So I believe Graham v. Conor was 1989. Is that right?
I think the incident happened in 85 or maybe 83, and then the decision was 89.
Okay, so really kind of crazy to me is that the decision for objective reasonableness was in 89. Rodney King happened in, I believe, 91 or 90, I believe.
Yep.
And
right after.
and you know, those officers on the state side were acquitted, and then 2 of them were charged federally, and they 2 of them served like 30 months or something.
Yeah, it was not very harsh at all.
So, you know, there is definitely reason to be upset,
Yeah, I would agree.
because you would think that that came first, and
Right.
then now we're here, and now we've made the adjustment. But
Yeah, man, that was one of those deals. Well, think about how many times that's happened, right? How many times those officers in LA had done what they did to Rodney King, you know, because, dude, it's the 80s or 90s. You know, there's no camera, body cameras. There's really no surveillance footage anywhere. There's no guy with a camera.
which there was in that case.
Yeah, just so happened to be. But think about how many times that they'd done that after. I mean, we were talking about the 80s and 90s. No one really cared what the case law said after that because it never went that far. It was always the officer's word against what the suspect said. And that didn't really change, probably until 10 years ago, maybe. And I don't know if that's for the better or worse, but that's what it is, you know.
Well, I think just it's hard to deny, and we understand that with body cameras, they don't see everything. They don't even really see what the officer sees necessarily,
No.
right? It's a one view of a certain direction at a certain radius, and doesn't take into consideration peripheral, you know, vision, or even maybe noises that happen, or necessarily officers' actions and suspects' actions, especially when you start getting up close, you can't see anything. It's just scuffle. Graham v. Conor being objective reasonableness and being the standard that officers are judged on whether or not their use of force was justifiable in the end, which I'd like to just kind of like talk about the fact that I hate getting into conversations with people about an incident that occurred and then talking about the justification for it, you know, or like, because man, you just don't, I mean, there's obvious situations where you're like, yeah, that doesn't look right, you know, but a lot of these cases, like it's not necessarily black and white, like right or wrong. You have to go through this whole legal process, go to court, have a trial maybe, and they're going to determine whether or not that ends up not being the standard, but fitting the criteria.
Everybody looked at a video and listened to what the TV told them and came up with an opinion based on that. That's literally what happened. We watched the entire country argue about that whole case, and then it went to trial. And whether or not you agree with the decision, that's your own opinion, but we're seeing that a lot lately. So you see that often as well.
Yeah, but I'd also like to add that cops do the same thing. You know, what do they call it? Confirmation biased or whatever. They seek out the information that confirms their own belief system. And definitely cops do it. Everybody does it, really. And that's why I already kind of talked about the Breonna Taylor thing, and that's what I'm trying to do, kind of like just be objective about what happened. And, you know, somebody who messaged me on Instagram about the Breonna Taylor thing when I started talking about it and literally just stating what happened based on the information I'm finding, you know, he was not being very nice, right? First of all, obviously an officer, I would assume, because otherwise nobody else would really care. And then when I posted about how the officer said he fired 16 times, I believe, and he had no recollection that he was even firing, that he ever fired his gun. And I quoted what he said. And, you know, that same guy messaged me and said something, again, not very nice, like, who the F, or where'd you get this information or whatever. And it's like instant disappear, you know, because dude, you're coming at me all wrong, dude, you know?
Yeah.
And all you have to do, if you really want to know, is Google it and find out, instead of being so emotional about your point of view. And, you know, and the fact of the matter is, and the point that I bring that up is that confirmation bias, right? Whoever heard the story about what happened, and officers told the story and public told the story, and everybody's making things, you know, fit their own narrative. But when you actually look at the information, it tells the actual story.
Right. I mean, how many officers do we know personally, you know, that'll tell you a story, right, about how they got maybe screwed over, or, you know, this isn't right, or that's not right, or they play a victim, but they paint a picture to make them sound like a victim. But in reality, I mean, none of us have the records of, whether it's internal affairs or that people blame the DAs or they'll blame this or that, and everyone's quick to point fingers. But it's like, okay, well, what did you actually do though? And a lot of these situations, I find that they're telling some of the truth, and I wouldn't even say they're lying, but maybe they're just leaving some details out, right?
Yeah, trying to, I mean, and also too, even what in those instances, what you or me can find out is limited anyways.
Right.
Like maybe there's a news story or something, or maybe somebody that was actually there that isn't so biased about what happened says, no, not really what happened. This is kind of what happened. And then you're like, oh, okay, that kind of makes sense why he got what he got.
Yeah.
And, again, one of those things that I'm kind of going after is like everybody trying to be a hero in their own story. Right.
Right.
And just take accountability, like if you're wrong, you're wrong, and if you're right, you're right. And we've talked about this in the past in other podcasts, but if what you're doing is happening within good faith, right, and you're trying to make the best decision, usually you're going to be okay.
Right.
And you have to know we'll talk about this because I'm sure you're going to get into this. I'm going to go over some questions in the end of some followers, and I think I saved some of them because I think you'll be a good to answer some of those questions. But you have to know what you're doing, okay? And that Graham v. Conor, going over objective reasonableness and using force, you got to know what you're doing, right? And your department policy is your guide to understanding what you can and can't do and when you can and can't do it. And maybe even sometimes you fit, the Graham v. Conor reasonableness, but it doesn't necessarily fit your policy, right? In which case, you're not going to go to jail or get in trouble, but you might get days off and you might lose your job.
Yeah. I always say this is one big game, and the department and the Supreme Court, they have a rule book, and you have to follow that rule book. When I was in the Army, we used to you have, what do they call them in the Army? The regulations, right? We have general orders, they have regulations, and man, I always remember like the uniform regulation was a big one. And people would always, it's like a barracks talk. Hey, can we wear a uniform like this? Can we wear a uniform like that? It's like, there's a whole policy on it. Just read it. Like, what are you asking me for, right? Like, you mean tell me like you haven't read it? Like, you're over here wearing this uniform, you're doing all these things, and like you haven't even read it? And it applies here as well. Like, man, think about how many people, and my phone blows up all day long. And I get on complex scenes and complex things and stuff. I always help people. But it's like there's some things that are so basic, like, hey, can I tow this car? Like, dude, like it's in the policy. Like, you didn't read it? Like, that's what you do all day long. Is you're on patrol.
Like, dude, it's blocking the moving lane, dude.
Right? Yeah. It's like, what are you asking me for? And well, I get it on like complex scenes and stuff's like, hey man, I need a second opinion, or come over here. What do you think about this? Or help furthering articulate things. Use of force is always, I'll help people out and be like, okay, well, this is the way. You got to articulate this and this and, but stuff that's so simple, it's like, dude, just go read it. It's all right there, right? It's easily accessible. You can print it out, take it home with you, study it,
I'm not saying I haven't called you or texted you. I've been out of the game for a while, so, when you're not paying attention or actually doing it, you kind of lose your touch.
Yeah, most definitely. But I don't think you've ever called me with a dumb question. You know what I mean? It's always been something that like we've had a long discussion about, or some sort of discussion where we bounce things off each other. Like, okay, well, what about this? Or well, where were you? Okay, that makes sense. Or, you know,
my questions are never yes or no.
Yeah.
Like, yes, you can, and no, you can't. It's
Right.
always like, well, what's the context of what's happening?
Yeah. It's like, hey, like one of the things, like I'm a uniform guy, and one of the things that bothers me the most is when I see officers wearing like improper uniforms, like blatantly improper uniform. Like, I don't really care if your pants are 511 pants or blower pants. Who cares about that? But like when you start adding stuff to your uniform, like people putting on those big, massive, thin blue line flags and like sticking them on places where they don't belong. It's like, okay, that doesn't look professional, right? Like, and if you can't get the littlest things right, like you're not going to get the bigger things right. Like these small details, like these small things, they all matter. And that's why I've always been big. When I was in the military, I was big on uniforms. I mean, I still shine my boots My boots right now are a little scuffed up because of the foot chases, but I still believe in having shine boots. Like, you look presentable.
Yeah, I know one of the things that's come up recently. Actually, it comes up every year at some point in time. Is wearing an approved hat if you're going to wear a hat.
Right.
It's like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Can't wear that.
Yeah. Dude, and this goes sideways every year because baseball season and the playoffs, our department will allow you to wear that team's hat, right, if they make the playoffs and the duration of the playoffs. But as soon as the playoffs are over, you have to go back to wearing a department hat, right, which would have the department's logo on it. But man, it always goes sideways this time of year because now we're middle of November. There's no baseball, and people are wearing they'll just start wearing ridiculous hats, man, or backwards hats. That's like a biggest pet peeve, like backwards hat guy, right? Like, just come on, what are you doing, right?
I talked about your uniform. I think it was episode 8, and what I said about the uniform and looking professional and having that when you have that interaction with that person. Who these people on the street, they're paying attention. Mm-hmm. They know exactly what they're looking at. And if you come at somebody sideways just based on your appearance, they're probably going to try and take advantage of you.
Oh, yeah.
And your appearance and what you wear and the things that you wear is the easiest thing you can do that takes really no physical effort on your part, right? Yeah. And you're supposed to be doing it anyways.
Yeah, I mean, maintaining a clean, proper uniform doesn't take really any effort. It takes like a few minutes a day, right? Just taking a brush to your boots at the beginning or end of your day takes literally 10 seconds. Making sure your uniform doesn't have crazy stains all over it, or your pants aren't ripped, or just the simplest things like your pen's where it's supposed to be, your body camera's in the same place, just small things.
I would say, like, based on somebody's appearance, if you look at an individual and their appearance isn't not adequate, everything else is usually not good.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Doesn't necessarily mean if you look good, though, that everything else after that does any good either. But that's a good
place to start.
It's a good place to start, and it's definitely that first impression, that initial appearance. So you talked about, people kind of contacting you and asking you, hey, how do I do this? And these things being stuff that you should know that are like pretty obvious and easily understood and is written or whatever. And I just want to make a point that if that's you, right, and if you're having questions to these should be easily identifiable answers in your mind, now that's simple stuff that you should be getting right, that you should already know and understand. Graham v. Conor is it's pretty simple to me, pretty much. But you're not going to call anybody if you have that kind of situation happening.
Right.
Like, and if you can't figure out the little things, the obvious things, and then you get a situation where it comes down to using force and you're like, oh, should I, can I, or whatever, right, probably in a bad spot.
Well, I'm sure you've seen, just as I've seen, where you have officers that hesitate, right? Because they don't know how much force they can use. You have a whole generation of police officers now that listen to an older generation that tells you can't police anymore because you're wearing a body camera. The whole goes to the back in the day thing, right? Oh, back in the 80s or back in the 90s or the 2000s. Well, those officers now who are mostly, off the streets or on the desk or just completely lazy now are telling the younger officers, hey, you can't use any force at all because, the department's going to hammer you. The DA's office is going to charge you. You'll end up on the media. And they scare these officers when they're just a few months on the street, and they confuse them so much to where they don't know what they can do. And now they're faced with a situation to where they need to make decisions that are either going to save their lives, save someone else's life, the safety of others, themselves, and they're just freezing. I've seen it. I mean, I've seen officers just stand there, have no idea what to do next. And it's, how do you coach that? How do you teach that,
Yeah, and again, it goes back to the accountability thing. And what I believe is that like every individual officer should kind of strive to be the most capable individual officer, whatever, on the street, on the shift, or whatever. And that should be almost like, an internal competition thing with yourself, right? And really it kind of starts with what we're going to talk about, the rule book and the law and knowing all that stuff and when you can and you can't. Because if you can't start there and don't you're getting yourself involved in something you're unsure about. Everything else after is going to be, a more difficult decision on your part. So obviously there was a need for use of force regulations or law or whatever. And, there's state laws that each individual state kind of has different laws around most things, right? What you can and can't arrest for, when you can and can't do certain things, what certain processes are, and those don't necessarily, Texas, is that right? Texas law, that's probably right. Texas law is, particular to Texas and may not necessarily apply in other states. Well, definitely doesn't apply. I mean, you shouldn't go outside, but the significance of case law is that it's the standard for the whole entire United States.
Right. Most states all abide by the same rules. I think there's a few states like New Jersey does things differently than a lot of states. Like they're probably the most oddball. California's getting that way as well. But mostly the rules apply, for everybody.
But what I've noticed with the use of force is that if you look up if you look up the criteria for being able to use deadly force in different states, it's usually read differently, or at least in the ones that I've read. And so Texas is when you're going to use lethal force, to prevent serious bodily injury or death. Very simple, short, sweet, and concise.
Right.
And obviously, you start getting into Graham v. Conor. It's like, well, was he going to commit serious bodily injury or death? And was this necessary? Right.
Well, before then, there really was no standard, right? It was the courts would look at it. Was there malicious intent? Graham versus Conor happened, and still those lower courts decided, hey, there's no malicious intent here. Like we're going to throw this lawsuit out. And it goes up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court turns around and goes, well, wait a second. And they ruled that the lower courts have to look, was it objective reasonableness, right? Like, would a reasonable officer do the same thing or close to it? And, even in that case, I mean, I want to say they broke that guy's foot. They put him in the hospital. They beat that dude pretty bad. And it turns out he didn't do anything at all, and they just released him, right? So one of the things that we'll do, especially like me, if I have to use any amount of force to detain somebody because they're resisting, they're going to jail, right? If I have a reasonable suspicion to detain you to begin my investigation and you resist that, or you interfere with my investigation, and I have to use physical force to detain you, anything more than a handcuff, you're going to jail for either interfering, resisting, or whatever the details of that investigation are. In their situation, they were just like, oh, he didn't rob the store. Oh, cool. Sorry, dude. But Rodney King, obviously those officers, they didn't care what the Supreme Court said 2 years ago. And to be honest, they probably didn't even know. The Supreme Court, I mean, they make rulings all the time.
We have legal update every year, right?
Yeah, that is true.
And they definitely probably sent an email. Let's get that for the record.
Yeah. But in their case, they probably didn't care.
Yeah.
They're just playing by their own rules.
And then again, in the context of using force, which is the only thing the public cares about, right? And if you illegally obtain some evidence and the case gets thrown out, and I mean, the department cares, you might, there might be repercussions for you as an officer if you didn't do it out of good faith, right?
Yeah.
Definitely some maybe illegal, and probably maybe even some department punishment or whatever. But it's not making the news,
right?
Unless it's some trial that's going on, which those do, and a lot of times in those trials, a lot of stuff gets thrown out, and then somebody gets acquitted, and people are like, how is this possible? Yeah. And then if you actually go and look at it, which those are a lot harder to look at because there's so much information, you find that, well, they couldn't even talk about this information in the trial because it turned out that the officer just went in the car and grabbed the stuff.
Right. A lot of people don't understand that. And that's another reason why on scenes, once a scene is safe, if there's no rush to start, searching through people's stuff and start tearing apart the scene, like, well, let's all take a step back, right? And let's break this down legally, slowly, right? To make sure you don't miss anything. You know, getting warrants and stuff like that. Like, dude, I've seen so many people that just, like, they'll just start searching cars and they don't really know why, or they'll start searching people's property and they don't really know why. Or you do like a protective sweep, and then like you turn around and, like, you know, you're walking out of the house and there's someone over there staring at something. You're like, hey, we gotta go, right? Like, you can't just go through people's stuff.
And I will say, if you're listening to this, at least on our department, you will 1,000% get, you know, there will be probably repercussions for you doing that stuff. And I know it happens.
Oh yeah, no, it definitely does.
And cops do things that, and what I was told, I asked somebody that's in the know about these kinds of things and just said, what is it exactly? Not in particular situations, what are cops doing that are getting them in trouble, but like, you know, and he said, basically, he's like, they just don't know what they're doing.
Right.
He said they're doing things that they shouldn't be doing. You know, in the context of the things that you talked about, like, I'm just going to go in the car and grab this, and then, you know, they're obviously it becomes a big deal for whatever reason, and then they find out, dude, what are you doing?
So one of the biggest things that I've seen lately, and I've had a lot of supervisors and older officers questioning me on this, since like reading people their Miranda rights. Like, you know, that was a no-no, like, back in the day, and I don't quite understand why. I know on bigger cases, if I'm working a homicide, a robbery, where it's going to be something more complex and someone other than myself is going to be investigating it, then I won't Mirandize somebody else's suspect. But if it's a case that I'm working from start to finish and I have someone detained to where they reasonably feel like they're under arrest, handcuffs in the back seat, something like that, yeah, I'm going to read them the Miranda rights before I ask them anything. The only things you can really ask them is identifying information. But as soon as you start getting into, you know, all this other stuff, everything they say is going to be thrown out. And people don't understand that. And that's why their cases are getting dismissed. And, you know, like, well, he admitted to everything and the DA's just dropped it. It's like, well, no, like, everything he admitted to doesn't count anymore. One of my biggest pet peeves is you get into a foot chase with somebody. And I see this almost on every single foot chase, not just in our department, but like you watch videos and stuff. As soon as they catch him, they go, why'd you run? Right? And then they give you a bullshit answer. They go on this whole thing. Oh, I was scared, man. I didn't know, blah, 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 blah. Well, guess what? All that doesn't count anymore because you didn't Mirandize him. That guy knows he's under arrest, right? You just chased him. And you just used force to detain him. Anybody would think, hey, that guy's going to jail, right? So everything he says, tossed.
I do want to say, though, like, one kind of, I wouldn't even say an exception, but one time you might want to think about probably asking a question, or maybe it's good to just Mirandize them first anyways, right? But if there's some public safety issue going on that you need to know right then.
Yeah.
So if you know he had a gun and you're running through a park, you know, okay, cool, Mirandize him. If you right, but like, hey, where's the gun, dude? Like, I saw you had it. Where is it? And in that case, whatever, right? Because you're prioritizing the safety of the public and children and kids or whatever over this foot chase case, which is a Class A misdemeanor or whatever it is, right?
Right.
So that's something that you might want to consider. So, do you want to talk about the events of Graham v. Conor?
Yeah. So it's an individual he's a diabetic, right? And he and his friend go to a convenience store because he's having an episode, and they're going to get some orange juice. Well, he gets out of the car and he runs inside, realizes the line's too long, runs outside, gets back in the car, and they speed off to the next place. Well, it just so happens to be a police officer sitting outside and watches this whole thing. And obviously he gains a reasonable suspicion that maybe he just robbed this place, right? Which is reasonable. I mean, who runs into a store runs out. Conduct a traffic stop, and while he's got the traffic stop going on, he's trying to run this information and check out to see if that store is actually robbed. This guy, in his diabetic episode, starts, gets out of the car, starts acting like crazy, right? Almost like a drunk guy, because it's common. That's how they act. If you don't know they're diabetic, you would think they're drunk. Well, he and his backup end up like beating this dude because they claim he's resisting and whatnot. And it may have appeared that way at first. but they beat him pretty bad. Put him in the hospital. They refused to give him any orange juice. I think one of his friend or somebody had brought orange juice, and they just refused to treat him. And once they find out that, hey, he didn't rob the store, they're just like, all right, you're free to go. Sorry. And they release him. So later he sues the city and makes a claim of excessive force under the Fourth Amendment, pretty much saying that he has a right to be free in his person, right? To not have excessive force. Because anytime you arrest somebody, that is, you're seizing, or even detaining, you're seizing that body, you're seizing you. And the smaller courts didn't hear it, and the Supreme Court did.
So I think before I forget, let's cover this because this is important. And I know it's happened since then. And this is just about, one, being a professional, and two, protecting yourself, because if somebody's having a medical issue that you don't address, that's going to be on you.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so anytime any person is in your custody or not or whatever, but we're talking about in your custody, and especially if you use force, but even if you didn't, and they look like they're laboring, or they could possibly be injured, or they're requesting an ambulance, or they're telling you they have some medical problem, you need to get that checked right now.
Right. And I think it's good practice anytime you have a use of force. Anything more than maybe a forced handcuffing. And this is what I do. I stay consistent with it. If it's anything more than me having to force their arms together to put them in handcuffs, I call for the fire department to come check them out. Whether they have complaints of injury or not, visible injury or not, you can get checked out. You can tell them you don't want to be treated rather than tell me. So I've now passed that on to somebody else. Because I'm not a medical expert. I don't want to have that liability on me. And at the end of the day, if you are injured or hurt, I'd rather you get checked out and be good to go. So I'm consistent with it. If it's anything more than a forced handcuff, I'll call.
And that doesn't stop either after you get them in custody and they're in the back of your car, because you should be paying attention to them on your way to the jail. And that happens. You hear it sometimes on the radio, hey, I'm going to pull over and check on my prisoner because they look like maybe they're just sleeping or whatever. But that's what you have to do, because you can't drive 30 minutes to the jail and they've been passed out in need of medical attention. You not ignored it, but didn't even recognize it.
Right. Or maybe they were acting fool on scene and now all of a sudden they're not, right? Maybe they were high. Maybe now they're coming down, and you never know. The last question I always ask suspects before I take them to jail, I say, is there any reason you need to go to the hospital? And even if HFD checks them out or not, just to make sure. Because they're going to ask them again at the jail anyway. You go to book them in, they're going to ask them about medical questions, and we all know the jail they don't want to see anything medical, so they'll just reject them, send them to the hospital anyway. But some people, I don't really see this in our department, but they take this stuff personal, use of forces and stuff, and they get all mad at the suspects, and we've seen plenty of videos on online, mouthing off to them and this and that. Dude, who cares, right? All right, if you had to use force on somebody, great. Take a minute, give him a minute, get him checked out, right?
Yeah, so it comes down to controlling your emotions, which is something that you hear me talk about a lot. And you have to do that all the time, right? You as soon as you start getting worked up and overexcited, things start to fall apart, right? So if you're in some interaction with somebody and you're letting emotion drive your decision making, there's just a higher likelihood you might, one, do something you haven't trained, you don't know how to do, and then liability starts to come into play.
Right.
And so, definitely you just should be doing it all the time. And actually, I have an idea for a podcast, which I'm going to talk about, being a police officer, policing and home life, and how those two things work together. Mm-hmm. Because one of probably the drawbacks of cops, right? Probably a reason why cops, can't keep relationships. Well, there's a lot of self-inflicted stuff, first of all. Plenty. Okay. So let's just identify that you're probably being not the person you should be being. However, doing things you shouldn't be doing, and that's probably why your relationship is trash.
Yeah.
But what I'm getting at is that as police officers, you learn and should learn. And if you don't learn this, you're going to get caught short 1,000%. Like, you can't be emotionally invested in pretty much anything, right, at your job. Do you think emergency room surgeons are emotionally invested in the people that come into the emergency room? I mean, how many people come in there, stabbed, shot, hurt, old, young, whatever the case is, and it's like, dude, they can't because you would never make it. Right. And so it's the same thing in policing. And that's, we'll talk about again, another podcast, but one of the problems with officers at home is that they teach themselves and they learn to not be emotionally invested out there. And so when you come home, your wife's telling you a story about something that you're not concerned with or something you don't think is a big deal, but it's a big deal to her. And you're like, I just saw 2 dead people today, like in the back of your mind.
Yep.
But, talking about in the context of use of force, your adrenaline's going. And so you got to learn how to control that through training and all this stuff. But if you let emotion drive your decision making, there's just a higher likelihood you're going to make mistakes. And in podcast 8, which is the one I just posted, the Camden County Sheriff, deputy, first of all, you can tell some stories about some traffic stops that you've been in and decisions that you've made, like on the freeway, even in particular. Right.
Right.
And so, and one of the kind of funny points I make in that podcast is that different cops in different parts of the state or different, I've worked in or kind of like a part-time deal in the department or in the city in which I grew up in, which is a small town, and maybe a 911 call comes in, maybe not. So there's really nothing going on, right? And so for those cops, there's a higher likelihood that when something serious does happen, you're going to be super elevated.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're not experiencing that stuff, on the daily. But in that case, the Camden County Sheriff's Office in particular, it's speeding, right?
Yeah.
He's not really stopping. I actually think he was evading, in my opinion. So we got, in my opinion, I'm thinking felony stop, right? And automatically when your mind goes felony stop, it should bring you down.
Right.
Because what's happening during a felony stop? You're creating distance between yourself and the bad guy. Right. And it's allowing you to make better decisions, right? You're trying to remove emotion from the situation. And, he gets fired up, get out of the car, walks up there, and the door comes open when he's almost there, and it's just not good. That's not where you want to be. So you got to control your emotions. It'll keep you out of trouble. And it'll increase your ability to perform, right? Even when we're talking about marksmanship, which is something I talk about a lot. But you also talked about when you have these people in custody that were acting a certain way and now they're not, right? Which is maybe something that isn't medically noticeable from terms of oh, they're slumped over, they're not responding, right? But you were acting all kinds of weird and now you're not. That's a change in behavior that you have to be able to recognize, right? Because that could mean that something else underlying is going on, these medical emergencies or whatnot. And you don't want to let that happen to you. I mean, it's happened, it happens. But you got to cover yourself.
Right.
And in the instance where you do all that and you get the fire department to come out and they look at him and they're like, their vitals are fine. And you're like, okay. And then you're driving to the jail and you're like, hey, he's passed out. Hey, wake up. Hey, get an ambulance out here. And they take him and he's no longer, with us or whoever. At least you did everything correctly.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's impossible to monitor them 24/7, right? Constantly while they're in your back. 'Cause you still have a scene to work. You still have witnesses to talk to, complainants to talk to. You have stuff to do, but you're supposed to keep checking on them, or designate someone in your scene. Hey, this is your guy now. That's one of the things I do, especially on major use of forces, whether it's mine or anybody else's. If you had to use real force, intermediate, to where you legitimately get into a fist fight with a suspect or something serious, more than just a tackle, and a takedown with a force handcuff, anything to where maybe your emotions are a little high. I always substitute the officer that's now has that suspect in custody. Whoever used force, you're no longer talking to the suspect unless you have to, right? We'll have another officer do it, only because it helps bring the emotions down on that scene for everybody. Because if you use force, you're going to be elevated and you're going to go talk to this guy and he's going to be mad that you used force against him, and that officer might be mad at him that he made him use force or whatever. It's just better practice. If you have another officer, use that other officer. Same thing with transporting to jail. 9 times out of 10, that your suspect is not going to treat a random officer as badly as he will somebody that just used force against them. That guy's going to give you a hard time the entire time you're down there, you know. And if you can't control your emotions, and yeah, you're gonna have a rough time as well. You're gonna be going back and forth with them and insulting them or whatever guys do, and it's just better to have somebody else take them.
So I think the issue with Graham v. Conor, well, the complainant's issue or person who was detained and force was used against him, was that in his mind, and really everybody else's mind, because that's why it got to the Supreme Court, not everybody else's, but the determining factor in what took place with the overall issue was that he didn't actually do anything. He didn't actually do anything wrong. Therefore, in the minds of whoever, the force that was used against him wasn't reasonable. That's kind of what they were going after.
Yes, but that's why the courts ruled it can't be in hindsight, right? At the time, that officer reasonably believed that a robbery had occurred. Now, let's say he did rob a store, right? And he wasn't a diabetic. And then he did start resisting. Okay, now is that force reasonable? Yes or no? And that's what the courts, and that's the standard now, right? And I think that's the right decision, right? Because you don't know, and you can't stop everything. There's no pause button to go rewatch. Hey, did this place get robbed? Okay, yes. All right. Okay, cool. You guys can use force.
So, when you are, a part of these situations as police officers, what you are operating on are the facts and circumstances that are known to you at the time. Right. And I also think that your ability as an officer and the tools that you have available to you can help you in, operating under essentially different circumstances. So, we have radios, and, sometimes calls go out over the radio, but whatever's going out over the radio to you is also in the call slip. But, you get a 911 call, you have a call slip, you have information, which usually isn't good. I mean, not that it's not good, it's just not detailed usually. Right. And sometimes it's incorrect, right? So here's an example, made this up. But you get dispatched to a robbery that just occurred, and they said the guy's wearing a red hoodie and he was last seen walking south on this street. And you're like, hey, I'm right here, send it to me. And you get to that street and you see a guy in a red hoodie walking south on the street, right? And so what would a reasonable officer do in that situation? Yeah, he would investigate because he matches the description, right? So you turn around and you make contact with the guy, and he is less than compliant, right? So he's not running, not showing you information that leads you to believe this is absolutely the guy, right? So he's just like, man, I didn't do nothing. What's up? What's going on? And you get out there just to, in furtherance of the investigation, to talk to him. Well, let's say this. I said robbery. So let's just say you do the right thing and you probably point your gun at this guy and say, hey, get on the ground. Or at least use your vehicle as somewhat cover and give him commands with your gun out. All right. So, and let's say initially he's got, he's doing something, kind of looking around or has his hands in his pockets. So you're like, okay, I'm going to point my gun at this guy now, because now I really think this is the guy. Right. So you point your gun at him, and other officers show up, and you approach and you get him into custody, and you find out that it's not the guy. Right. You take him back there and they do a show up or whatever. And they're like, no, that's not him. This dude was little. Right. Mm-hmm. It turns out that you got the wrong dude. Right. And I think on the outside looking in, to the average person, and even certainly the person who probably had the force used against him, because that is force, thinks like, that's not right. That wasn't me. I didn't do that. Right. It's like, we get it. And now we know that. Right. But the reason that this happened is because the time and place and the circumstances that we had led us to believe it was you. You weren't listening.
There's been times where I've picked up the suspects that match descriptions, very close to the descriptions. I bring them back. We do a show up, and it's not them. There's been times where I've had to use force on people like that, and I've actually arrested people. There was one deal where I arrived on a in progress crime, and I show up and there's people screaming and yelling, and of course there's no call yet, so it's just to me, it's just a bunch of people screaming and yelling and pointing at cars driving out. And as that's happening, call drops for this, and gives the description of the car I just watched drive out. So we pull him over, and the guy was not complying at all. Digging through the car, like legitimately thought this guy was going to pull a gun out. We were like, oh wow, this is it. We end up having to use force to detain this guy. It's a whole problem. And then as we're doing this, we're getting more calls from witnesses saying, hey, wrong car, right? And it just so happened 2 of the exact same cars left the parking lot at the same time. What are the odds of that? Well, now that dude's long gone. And we had more officers on scene that investigated the original cause for the disturbance. But now we just had to use force against a guy who just wouldn't comply when we're trying to investigate a crime, where you meet the description, you meet the vehicle description, everything. You're leaving the scene of the crime almost instantly. But he gave us a hard time the whole time, and forced us to use force against him to detain him. And well, that guy went to jail.
Yeah, and I know, and this is really important. And so the scenario that I made up is very obvious that, okay, yeah, I mean, this could very well be the guy, right? So something that isn't more obvious, but you feel the need to still investigate it, you can kind of handle it in a similar way, but be more, understanding that, like, I mean, this is really kind of a major guess here, right? Mm-hmm. So, in a situation I know, not like intimately with all the details, but there was like a robbery that happened, and it was a very busy intersection and very busy streets, right? And when the robbery usually comes in, it's happened already, and the guy's gone, right? Unless it's a panic alarm where they're still in there, which happens. Mm-hmm. But in most cases, if somebody's calling on the phone, the dude's probably gone, right? And so the vehicle description was given out, no plate, just description. I mean, and then you're in a busy place, so chances of you seeing a similar car are pretty high. Right. And officers arriving in the area found a similar car, and they did a felony stop. And I think the guy, well, I don't want to get too specific, but the way I kind of remember the story is that they didn't handle it in the most tactful manner, mm-hmm. right? They handled it kind of like, dude, I think this is really the guy. When in my mind, I'm thinking like, that's real guess, right? You're still doing it right. Like, mm-hmm. you're still like, hey, might as well, same car. Let's see if they run. Well, that's the guy, right? But so they were kind of, in the way I kind of imagine it, I remember in my mind, just like unprofessional about it. And the guy, first of all, getting out of the vehicle, pretty obvious, probably not the dude. Let's just say that, right? And they kind of just went the whole 9 yards, I think they were cussing and yelling and guns pointing. It's like, you got to understand the difference between the two, right? Mm-hmm. And, you brought up a point, I think, about calling people out or felony stops or whatever. So I want to cover this is so what I do in situations like that, say felony stop if you want, right? But what I do in situations where I'm not quite sure, just kind of want to see what's going on, is I let dispatch know or everybody know that I'm going to call them out. So I'll just say, hey, I'm going to stop this vehicle real quick and see if they pull over. Okay, hey, they pulled over. I'm going to have them, I'm going to wait for backup, whatever. I'm going to wait for backup, and we're just going to call them out. That's basically saying, like, I don't really know, but I'm not going to take the chance of walking up there, and I'm just going to, and I'm actually kind of saying, like, I don't have plans on pointing my gun at this person, right? But I am prepared to if I need to. Right. And I think when people say felony stop, it usually indicates you're pointing your gun. Right. So I like to differentiate between the two and just say, yeah, I'm just going to call them out. Yeah, no, that's Supreme Court. I mean, that's Pennsylvania versus Mims. Just anyone for any reason. I think the only state that requires you to have a reason is New Jersey. And that reason's like pretty low, like, more like a hunch. But anywhere, any state, you can pull somebody out of the car. It's still good practice to have a reason to do it, right? If you're pulling someone over for blowing a stop sign, right? Like, and you're just like, hey man, get out of the car. It's like, well, you don't need a reason why, but you probably should, right? In case things escalate. But no, you can,
You can pull someone out for anything. You can pull the passengers out as well, for any reason you want.
Yeah, I've done that. I do that a lot where I just say, and I don't, and so obviously in a felony stop situation and advocate for and whatever, do whatever your policy says you can do or whatever, but I always put as much of your own vehicle between yourself and the bad guy, because if the shooting starts while you're in the V, you're probably going to run to the back of your vehicle anyways. So it's always good practice to put as much of the vehicle between yourself and the potential threat. But there's just situations that there is no call. It's just a traffic stop. But, maybe, okay, you turn around in this car and you already have your violation, and now they see you turning around, and then they quickly pull into a place and park, which happens all the time. Like, and so in that case, when that happens, I don't walk up to the car.
Right.
Okay. I just don't, because his behavior is telling me that something about the situation is not right.
That individual did not want to have an encounter with you, right? So he made it to home base. He went out into private property, is what they think.
Maybe not even home base, just a base.
Right.
They just established this. This is my base now.
Yeah.
And so I had this happen. Same thing, it's like the plate was trash. It wasn't even legit, like a paper plate at all or whatever. They were driving without their lights at night, and as soon as I flipped around, and I hate these situations, and for whatever reason they happen to me all the time. I don't know if everybody else is experiencing this, but if you know what you're looking for and you kind of see what you think is going to be an investigative stop that leads to something else, which is kind of the goal for us.
Right.
Most proactive cops is like, we don't really care about the traffic.
Right.
We just want
stops.
to, investigative stops. So, man, those are super dangerous, and they suck really bad, because in that situation in and of itself was really dangerous for myself, because, man, especially when they do that, and because the goal with the traffic stop is like, I guess different officers in different parts of the state probably have maybe different procedures, but I'll just explain kind of different ways you can do it. So we can put out on traffic over the radio, which is not typical. Like, you usually try to use your computer to do it. And ideally on your computer, there's like a box where you can run a plate. So what I do is, like, if I know I'm going to stop a car, I type in the plate, and I already ran it or whatever, right? But I type in the plate and I leave it there, right? And then, because from there you can basically hit one button, it'll put you out on a traffic stop there. So that's what I do. And when people do that, they dodge you real quick and they slide into a place. It leaves you, especially if you don't have a plate yet, you can't do that, right? So now you have to come out over the radio, which, if you're not prepared for it, you're gonna get a little bit worked up right away anyways. But now, by the time you even get to the area where they turned into, there's really nothing to put out yet, right? So you turn in there, and by the time I'm getting on the radio, I'm already behind them. It didn't go anywhere. So as soon as I saw him cut the corner and I pulled in there and saw him, I was like, it's right here, right now.
Right.
So now I've got my door open and I'm using my radio outside of my vehicle.
Right.
Okay? So, and as I'm trying to put out the stop, a female, exits the passenger side, and she's coming back and talking to me like, oh, well, we didn't do nothing. And it's like, what's going on.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
That's a clear indication that they are trying to, one, avoid you from stopping them, and two, there's something else going on here.
Of course. That
they are trying to, not manipulate, but basically, direct your attention away from whatever's happening.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I see that all the time when they pull in, and my rule of thumb is I want to have the information put out before the cars stop. Right. So if I'm going to stop a car, I try to make sure I've already run it. I've already looked at who this is, what this car is involved in. And then when I go to stop it, my computer work is done as soon as this car goes in the park. I want to be out of my car as soon as possible. And some people may disagree with that, but there's one place that's you're guaranteed to have a person in a vehicle, and it's the driver's seat. So if this person decides you pull over to jump out of his car immediately and start shooting, the first thing he's going to shoot at is your driver's seat, right? Exactly where he thinks you're going to be. So I try to get out of my car as fast as I can on every traffic stop. I'm consistent with all of them. And that's why having a partner is great, right? That guy's typing it in, and I'm watching the driver, I'm watching the passengers. Because like you said, I don't, being a proactive officer, you're not running every single plate. You're not pulling over everybody for every minor infraction. You're looking for cars. You're like, okay, you're looking for suspicious activity. Where did this car come from? Are all the windows tinted? Is the windshield tinted? That's a big one. Where did he just pull out of? Where is he pulling into, right? Do you think he was going to pull into this particular spot if you weren't behind him? What did he do when he pulled in? Sometimes I'll let somebody pull in and make them feel like they beat me, right? Let them feel like they won. I'll drive down maybe a block or two and turn around and see if they're back on the street again. There's been times where we've done exactly that, and we've pulled a car over on traffic, and then there's, you find magazines but no guns. Like, okay, hold on right here. Get someone else out here. You go back to where you saw them pull over the first time. Boom, you just found a whole stash of guns and dope. That's not uncommon, and a lot of people overlook that kind of stuff. Those are good stops, and then you just turned everything into a felony, because why did you dump all this stuff here, right? Like, now you're tampering. You knew an investigation was going to begin, right, by me getting behind you. You thought I was going to pull you over, so you stopped here and you hid everything, and then you kept going, and now you're like, don't have everything, I'm clean. Well, not exactly, right? So picking cars like that and those sort of traffic stops, and they can become dangerous, man. Like, tinted windows. I do not walk past a tinted window. There's no way. You cannot get me to walk past a tinted window. If I can't see in it, nope. I'll knock. Sometimes I'll get up close and knock on the back. And if they don't go down, I walk back and I'll call you out of the car. But most of the time, especially at night, I won't even approach. I'll get on the loudspeaker and order you to turn all your windows down. And then you might turn a simple traffic violation into a felony stop if you don't want to, comply. And that's not uncommon, actually. I mean, it happens quite often.
Yeah, I think in some of the, I think when I'm looking at body cameras, because, I'm an officer and I've been doing it for a little bit, I consider the fact of, putting myself in the officer's position from training and experience and taking that into consideration when I'm talking about something or critiquing something. Because if you watch some of my body cameras and some of the things that I've done, they flat out look wrong, and they are wrong, but there was nothing I could do about it, right? Mm-hmm. Because if people aren't listening, they're not listening. Right. It doesn't matter how, stern you get with them or tell them they're going to go to jail. And in that case that I was talking about, whatever, and the vehicle stopped and the female came out and was delaying, trying to direct me somewhere else, and I knew this was all not good. And so I was telling her repeatedly, stand in the front of my vehicle, and she was not listening to me. It's like, well, what can I do, right? Well, I can handcuff her real quick and put her in the back. I still got this other driver. Right. I don't know what's going on. So I'm just trying to get another unit there to me, and then he comes out of the car. And now it's all real bad again, right? Now I got two people that aren't listening, that are standing near my vehicle. And so something I commonly say or often say is that sometimes the only thing you can do is be so aware of what's happening that you are ready to move out of the way in an instant or act, right? And that's a lot of the case. That's anticipating things, right? So I'm standing there. I'm really kind of focused on him because females usually aren't the main aggressors, right? So I've seen her, talking to her. She's not really compliant. But now he's back here now and he's not listening, and and so I'm just watching him, and I'm just anticipating that he's gonna pull a gun out of his waistline, or that he's gonna do something. And I'm thinking also too, if he runs, what am I gonna do, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if he runs, I'm probably not gonna do anything because my car's still here, and I can't remember if I had the keys at that time, right? So I'm not gonna leave him, right? So these are all things that you're thinking about in those instances that you should be thinking about and anticipating, so that when they happen, maybe you're not surprised when they do, right? And so, in that situation, even working at night, I always loved working at night, and still do, for like what I believe are tactical advantages of the lights of your vehicle or your handheld lights. And so I'm trying to place them like in front of my car where they can be, they're doing this or whatever. It's like, that's good. That's what I want, right? But at the moment where this guy is so close to me, I'm just like, dude, if he does anything from right here, the only thing I could do is close distance and try to, push him off of his feet or do whatever to try to create distance. And so no doubt there are situations as cops, and even in body cameras, when you see them, it's like just unavoidable. Yeah. And I try to not, or if I do talk about those instances, I try to make it known, like, this is a jacked up situation, and sometimes you have to be where you are right now.
Right. One of the conversations I've had with my partner kind of recently, we've both been doing we're strictly a proactive unit, and we've been doing it for almost 2 years now. And the more we've done it, the better we've become at it. we've approached things a lot more, tactically and safer, and I think that has a lot to do with why we haven't ended up in another shooting or something crazy. It seems the longer we do it, the less crazy, out of control situations happen. Being able to control chaos. We're not the greatest at it, but we've gotten significantly better. Being able to, take a scene, because most of the scenes that we're on are, they're all patrol investigations. They're all things that we've on-viewed. We've showed up and we've been talking to people or whatever. No one's calling the police. For what we do, we're there to find the guys, catching the bad guys that no one's calling on, right? So the element of surprise is always there. So things unfold significantly fast, right? It's crazy. And I think being able to control that chaos and how it unravels really has prevented us from being in some sort of dangerous situations.
Yeah, I think if I was going to pick people to be part of a proactive unit or whatever, I mean, I'm really keen on character, because character is a hard thing to change. Like, right. You can't, you could teach it. I think you can teach men with good character to have better character.
Yeah.
Like, to kind of dial it in. It's really hard if you know of people or whatever that they're just not good people. Mm-hmm. It's really hard to make them good people, to change their character. I've always said that, interviewing people, and I've had this discussion amongst members of the team I was on previously where if, we just had the discussion because in some of the teams, it seems like maybe some of the officers, whether they actually have a say in who comes to the team or not, they like to feel like they do in certain situations, which is cool. And so I've had those conversations with some people and I've said, I don't need the person who understands tactics the best. Mm-hmm. I don't need or want or looking for a person who knows, everything that the best. Because, in my experience training people, and especially in the Marines, is the only thing that matters is really kind of just two things. Having a good character, right? Being a good person, and then having a willingness to want to learn and figure it out.
Right.
And if you have a willingness to do those things, then you're going to be good. Yeah. Like, you're going to get better. There's just no way around it because time put in equates to levels of skill. It's just a matter of fact. And so I've taken Marines that, people gave a hard time or didn't like or whatever, and they were weak, right? And they couldn't shoot well. They couldn't do all those other things well. They couldn't even do them better than the people with bad character. But because they had a good attitude and they were a good person and they were really into it and wanted to learn, they went farther.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And developed skill beyond the person that was, didn't have, a good work ethic or a bad character. And I'm just being in general, like being around people with bad characters is not a good time.
Yeah, nobody wants to do that. I think every rookie we get on our shift, I'll go on a roll call and I usually hand out my phone number to just about everybody. I'm like, look, you guys need anything, you call us. We're always out there. And there's only certain ones. If we get 4 new rookies, maybe one calls me, maybe one checks by and asks questions and stuff like that. And those are the people you focus your attention on, right? The other 3, okay, they know the resources are here and they don't want to learn, get any better. Okay, whatever. Some people are just here for a paycheck, but you get those, 1 or 2 guys that actually care to learn, right? And that makes it more fun too when you go out there on a scene with them and you're teaching somebody something in real time. You're like, hey, you see that guy doing X, Y, and Z? What does that tell you, right? And you let them kind of tell you and develop, a scene, let them do it. You go, all right, we'll go get them. And all right, and then, who knows what they get, but it makes it more fun. And it helps them get hands-on training and really understand what you can and can't do as a police officer.
Yeah, and I think, I'm going to go get to some questions here in a second. That'll kind of lead into that. And again, this will lead into the answer to the question, so I don't want to say it right now. But I'll read the question, and then you can tell me what you think. But, objective reasonableness, would a reasonable officer, given the same facts and circumstances, have done what that officer did, is essentially what it is. But you can't be, as an officer in the moment, using or need to use force or should use force and you don't know, right? You don't know, like, can I do it? Should I do it? And real quick, before I get into that, quick story about objective reasonableness that actually follows in line with Graham v. Conor. Similar situation happened to me. I saw a vehicle that didn't have a license plate on patrol, was actually doing something else, but I noticed that he probably saw me because when he did the whole, let me get off the street and kind of go away for a minute. When I was kind of coming back the other direction, I saw the vehicle again. This time he went from one location to the other, which was another indication. It's like, well, you were going this way and now you're just like, your behavior is all kind of changing here.
Yeah.
And being in an area where there's a lot of stolen vehicles, I'm thinking in my mind, car's probably stolen and he's dodging me. He's trying to make sure I'm not around before he gets back on the road and does whatever he's going to do. So I see him going to this location. I also pull in and I'm now looking for the vehicle. And you don't know. I mean, he could have actually been going to a friend's house or something, or you could find it parked, right? So I end up going in there and I see him pretty quickly still in the vehicle traveling, and I have to do a U-turn. He sees me again and does the whole, let me park here and pretend something else is happening. So he does that, and, you know, in my mind, again, thinking stolen vehicle, he's trying to dodge me. Now he's trying to change his behavior to make me think that something else is going on, right? It's all the things that I'm thinking. And so I'm able to put out over the radio, you know, traffic stop basically, and have another unit start coming my direction.
Yep.
And I said, hey, come over here and talk to me. And immediately he was not compliant, kind of verbally, man, I didn't do nothing. What's going on? Why are you stopping me? All this stuff. So I explained to him, and he's going off again. And so then obviously I could see, like, he's aggressive. Like, I don't know why. Again, behavior that's telling me he's trying to divert my attention, right? So I ask him for his ID, for which he does not have one. And I go, okay, well, now you're just going to get handcuffed. I'm going to detain you, or I'm going to arrest you, right? I'm going to arrest you based on these violations. So I go to, you know, hey, request, you know, hey, turn around, put your hands behind your back. And he doesn't want to do that. So I go to grab him, and then he becomes more aggressive, starts pulling away. And I'm holding on to him, just making sure he doesn't run off. So I make sure I have units coming. And then he grabs me, right, which is a no-no. Like, one of those things you don't do. So immediately I recognize that I need to, like, you know, quickly gain control of the situation, and I conduct a takedown, and I'm able to put him on the ground and handcuff him, right? And as it turns out, you know, the vehicle status was like, it was just like not registered in a really long time, and maybe it was stolen at some point or something, but there was nothing to indicate, oh, it is a stolen car, right? The keys were there or whatever. And, you know, so truly there was no actual, like, underlying major crime happening. And had he stopped on a traffic stop, then at most he would have got some tickets, right? But probably not.
Right. Because like we talked about earlier, pretext stops, you know, looking for other violations other than traffic, right? Looking for something more than traffic, and using traffic codes and whatnot to put yourself in that situation to further investigate. And a lot of people don't understand that. The Supreme Court's already ruled that's fine. But, you know, like you said, that they immediately deny any sort of responsibility. Like, I didn't do anything. It's like, well, not necessarily. I mean, have you looked at your plate? You don't even have one, or it's all tore up, or, you know, oftentimes I see them when they put them in their back window and the window's dark. Well, okay, well, how am I supposed to see that, right? Whereas if they just complied from the get-go, even if they do have something in the car, you know, they're a felon and they got a gun in there, or they got dope in there, maybe it's like cocaine, you can't smell it. You know, they don't understand, like, if you just comply and you're a nice person, like, and don't give me a reason to go search in your car or whatever, like, you're probably going to get away. But if you're going to act a fool as soon as you get out of the car, probably going to go to jail, especially if you're putting your hands on us. Like, that's a big no-no.
Yeah. That was a younger generation person. I think the issue there was just like, he just didn't think we could do anything. I don't know. Kind of odd. And trust me, I would have preferred not to have to do all that.
Right.
Like, in the grand scheme of things, like, that charge is nothing. Right. And honestly, like, the only reason I'm really charging you at this point is because I don't have a choice.
Right.
You know,
you
like,
forced us to do what we did.
I can't do all this and now just let you walk away.
Yeah.
You know,
that's a no-no.
And plus too, like, I think the value in those circumstances is hopefully, especially in the younger generation, is just like a little bit of a lesson. Mm-hmm. And that's what I tried to explain to him afterwards. And he proceeded, you know, even well after. Well, actually, you know, I'm very respectful. Like you talked about before, and I meant to mention this. Like, controlling your emotions leading up to the incident, but then afterwards too. It's like, and they tell us this and they teach us the handcuffs are on, it's done.
Right. Right.
And now there are situations that have existed where a suspect was able to do something with handcuffs on, and officers had to use some force. Right. So that does happen, but and so for me, again, controlling my emotions, and not trying to make this out to be something it isn't, and they're in handcuffs. For me, I'm usually like, I don't say respectful, right? But accommodate. Like I try to accommodate them a little bit, right? So, and this is a good point for anybody. This has worked well for me in cases where you allow, because there are some officers that I'm sure are like, nope, you're not calling anybody. Nope, you're not doing this. No, no, no. It's like, well,
it's a give and take.
Yeah. And also like they might provide you with something that you didn't have because you allowed them to do that.
Well, if you allow somebody to make a phone call in your back seat, I'm not always opposed to it, because anything they say on that phone is admissible, right? Even if they don't want to provide you a statement, you Mirandize them. And they're like, I don't want to speak to you, the police officer, but they want to talk to their mom, and you give them the phone, or you even hold the phone, and you let them have a conversation. Everything they say is admissible. You can use all that evidence. So yeah, why not? I mean, I wouldn't allow them to request people to come to your scene. Usually, it's the last thing right before we leave. It's like, okay, I'll let you make a minute or two phone call. And then we're leaving. We're going to jail.
Yeah, I mean, and usually, again, kind of depending on the facts and circumstances, like you're setting kind of rules for them. Like, all right, we're not texting, we're not FaceTiming. Right. Actually, even better if you can dial the number for them and hold it so they can actually have access to their phone. And like you were talking about, I've had that happen, way in the past with some narcotics related charges, and hey, you want to call somebody, let them know what's going on. Yeah, okay. Calls them, like, what's going on? I'm going to jail. Like, for what? And he's like, basically says, I had cocaine in my vent or something like that. Or then he catches himself at the end. He goes, they're saying I did. They're saying I did. Right. It's like, ooh, that's not good for you.
Smooth.
Yeah. So, again, just to like reiterate, the handcuffs are on, you control your emotions leading up to, and there's no, at that point, like you're not getting a whole lot out of like, I don't want to say being angry or whatever, but,
and it doesn't get you anywhere. Right.
And actually it could do the opposite where like this guy, you did everything right. But this guy, he's already mad at you. Mm-hmm. And now you're like, no, I'm not getting you water. Nope, you're not getting your phone. No, I'm taking this from you.
Right. Then you're going to tow his car and you do all this other stuff.
Yeah, you might actually be placing yourselves in a complaint, even though you're right. Right. But just because you're not being a decent human being.
Right. And then oftentimes, I don't tow many cars. Even using force and everything, like once we settle down a little bit, right? It's like, all right, hey, man, I'll read them Miranda rights, let them sit there, let them think about what's happening. I'll come back and I'll be like, is there anybody who can come pick up your car? Right. And usually they're calmed down. They're like, look, dude, I don't want to tow your car. I don't want to do this. Just, is there anyone that can pick it up? And they'll tell you yes, and then they'll make that phone call. They'll talk to whoever, and then maybe have a conversation with them. They'll be more at ease. Another tactic that I use, and sometimes I use this before I put handcuffs on them. If I start talking to them, I immediately try to put them at ease and say, look, hey, this isn't a big deal. You're not under arrest right now. You're not going to go to jail. We're just trying to figure out what's going on here, or we're trying to do this, right? Even the hand motions, they're like, let's come down. Let's just have a conversation. Like, just come over here. We'll talk about it over here. It's not a big deal. And, the panic will go down in their eyes. Because if you're sitting there ordering them, do this, and that, just as elevated as you are, they're going to get to the same spot. But they're going to be thinking their fight or flight's going to go off, and they're going to take off, or they're going to fight, or they don't quite understand. And then explain everything to them. Well, maybe not everything, but like make them understand what's happening. And if they don't understand, be like, okay, I'll repeat it. And then, okay, you understand now? Okay, cool. Right. And then sometimes I'll use, not to get into specifics, but I'll try to be like, doesn't it look a certain way? Like, look at it through my eyes, right? Like, I saw you do this, and then I saw you look at me, then I saw you turn around real quick, and I saw you take off, and I saw you do this. I was like, what do you think? And then they'll be like, yeah, man, I understand, right? So, okay, so cool. Now we're all on the same page. And that really does help. It really does help with your investigations.
And so maybe that leads into this first question, so I'll ask it. It's not really a question, but we have to kind of make it one. Basically, it says de-escalation tools, tactics for law enforcement. And actually, I know this individual, and he's from Portugal.
Okay.
And I have a couple followers that are in the subscriber portion of the Instagram. That one's from Canada and one's from Portugal. Mm-hmm. It's very interesting, like learning from these guys and what they can and can't do. And just real quick, actually, I think it's in Portugal. They can't point their weapon, or maybe it's Canada. I can't remember. One of them, they can't point their weapon at somebody unless there is like a clearly identifiable threat.
Right.
So like they have to have a knife in their hand or they have to have a gun. Not like, yeah.
And putting you behind the curve there.
Oh yeah, for sure. And I think what he explained was that like they could get in trouble if they point their gun at somebody that doesn't meet that criteria.
That's crazy. I couldn't imagine policing, especially in a place where we police, to where like you can't be ahead of things like that. Man, that puts you in a really disadvantage.
Yeah. So I think de-escalation in and of itself is actually something that I need to. It goes deeper than what people think. And when people think about de-escalation, they think that, or think or know, or whatever, the idea in de-escalation is that you as an individual officer or officers are going to be inside of a situation and be able to change the outcome of the situation from a force perspective based on how you communicate or tools or whatever the case is. And I remember seeing something, like I said, I had to go back and kind of research it. But I think that's the idea in which de-escalation is built on. But I don't know necessarily that there's any verifiable data or tactics or techniques that truly prove or show that this actually takes a situation that was going to go into a different place of violence or whatever, and actually made that not happen because of what you did. De-escalation tools, like I don't know what tools would be. I mean, I don't consider like any type of less lethal option like a de-escalation tool. Like
no, I don't know either. Maybe just verbal persuasion. That's about it.
Yeah, I think, and here's kind of what I believe. Well, be polite, be a professional, but be prepared, right? So I think that you can, as an individual officer, the way you approach a situation, dictate the outcome ultimately, because I think that there are probably cops out there that don't necessarily treat people with respect and kind of treat people like they're lesser people or whatever, and that pisses people off.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And I think that, but I think for officers that are acting professionally and treating people with respect and are showing up to these already chaotic situations or situations that are going to be chaotic, there's not really necessarily anything that person is going to do or can do that I believe are going to stop that from happening.
Right.
Other than, because they're already approaching it correctly. Right. How does maybe somebody reviewing, I guess that'd be a better question. Like, how is somebody that reviews body cameras, trying to determine whether, I don't even know what that conversation, determine whether other tactics could have been used to stop something from happening? Because now we're talking really just about objective reasonableness.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's pretty similar. Man, every situation is going to be different. Every situation calls for different tools. Some situations call for a taser, some are like a 40 millimeter, some just, you don't need any force, right? Some, just talking to somebody. Man, that's case by case. I'm not quite sure how to answer that one.
Yeah, so tactics for LE, but I think that falls into the category of what we were just talking about. I mean, if you kind of do the things that we talked about, you should be okay. And if it's already going to be a situation that the person has made up their mind on what they're going to do, I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do except meet or exceed the level of force that's being used against you.
And a lot of those situations are call for service based. Obviously, you're getting called somewhere where something's already happened, and you get there and somebody's already acting a certain way. Mostly what I do is I'm not responding to calls. I'm finding crime in progress, right? So for me and people like me, how I present myself when I arrive somewhere is going to be how they're reacting to me. I'm not reacting to them because I'm trying to sneak up on them. Or, a lot of times you'll have, dope dealers at corner stores. It's kind of where they sell out of or whatever. Well, no one's calling me there, and they're not expecting me to show up. Whereas if you have some sort of domestic violence, somebody just beat their wife, that guy knows the police are coming, right? He's prepared for you. So when you get there, you have to react to him. But the difference is when I arrive somewhere, they're reacting to me. And if I get out of the car at 100 miles an hour and just start running up, they're going to take off. They're going to fight. They're going to do whatever. But if I casually pull up, get out of the car, just talk to somebody. Hey, man, how you doing? What's going on? What are you doing here? Okay, cool. Hey, what's in your bag? This or that. Bring everything down. And, there's always a chance they might just take off anyway. They might, whatever. But you have a better chance of de-escalating before it even gets to that point.
And also in those situations, probably placing yourself at a tactical advantage, whereas you came in there screeching like, someone's dealing dope. It's like, well, now you're still in your car and he's running. Right. And now what are you doing?
Right.
So that makes it more difficult. So another question that was asked is work versus gear. So I guess the question is maybe training over gear, like what's more important maybe, but I mean, the obvious answer is training, because there isn't a piece of gear that's going to make you competent and knowing how to do it. And a good example of this is a video that I'm going to do on the alien gear holster at some point. And kind of my takeaway from that holster is in general, it's not a better holster unless it kind of meets a certain criteria. But my point is that if you don't train with the Safariland level 3 holster and you think that you're going to buy the Alien Gear level 3 holster and just be better at drawing your gun, it's just not true.
Right.
Okay, because in both of those instances, there's a process for how you get to your gun. And if you don't know it intimately, you're going to get caught up. Mm-hmm. So definitely work and training over gear, but there becomes a time when you start to see little tiny advantages and little things that you think will make you a little bit better or just a little bit faster. So, one example would just be like, I think out of the academy, they give you magazine holsters that have like the leather. Is it leather probably now, or who knows? But I think it has the strap over top of the magazine. Now you could train with that and be faster than somebody who has, the holsters like I do that are not covered or strapped in.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, your level of skill is going to be determined by how much work you put in. Mm-hmm. But if you're really kind of pushing yourself to that level, you're going to see that little bit of an advantage of like not having to unstrap it first.
Right.
So work is always going to be better to focus on. But as you progress, you want to kind of just find these little things. And I've got boxes of stuff in all kinds of places where
I've noticed.
I've bought stuff and it's in a box somewhere because it just didn't do it for me. Let's see. Another question. Oh, this is a good one. So what would be your advice to somebody that is a new officer? That's like a whole podcast, right?
Yeah, that's
a whole episode. But let's say if you had to pick one thing, a couple things, like what would your advice be?
Man, that is such a loaded question. I'm kind of biased because, I'm a proactive officer, but I think you truly learn the ins and out of this job being proactive, even at a young, I wouldn't say young age, but, early on in your career, because you learn what you can and cannot do. Like I said earlier, you're not reacting to other people. They're all your actions. Okay, what can I do, right? Like what does the law and policy say I can do for this situation? You know what I mean? And it really helps you because there is no box telling you the guy wearing the red shirt's the bad guy, the guy wearing the white shirt's the good guy, and the bad guy hit the good guy. 'Cause oftentimes people just listen to their computer. Hey, I get dispatched to a family violence and husband beat up wife. I get there, husband's there, wife's beat up. That's pretty easy. I mean, a high school guy could figure that out, But when I tell you that, hey, maybe this specific apartment complex is a problem, there's a lot of shootings in here, or there's whatever, go figure out how to solve that problem. You don't have to be an expert police officer. You just got to know your local laws or, your city ordinances and stuff. figuring out little things to develop bigger things. And you're only going to do that being proactive.
Right. So I'll add to that because mine is the same, but put it in a little bit more easily understood context for you. And if you're a cop, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But when you get out of the academy and you go do your training and you get done with your training and you're by yourself, you have really two choices. You can just take what you have learned and what you think you know, and that could be the end of it, basically. Whereas to the point where you're like, man, I hope I don't get that call.
Right.
Oh man, I found drugs in this car, an accident.
Right.
Now what do I do?
Now what do you do? Yeah.
Right. So the best thing that you can do for yourself is purposely put yourself in these situations to figure out what it is you should be doing. Because you don't want to be at work and have that like almost anxiety, like that feeling of like, man, I don't know what to do. We were all there. There was a point when me and you didn't know what we were doing, and we decided, I don't like that. I'd rather figure out what we're doing. And so if there's a call that you've never done before, go take the call. If you don't know how to tag narcotics and do that process, go do it. Because when and get to a point where you're comfortable doing all these things, right? And you don't have that feeling of like, man, I hope that I don't get that. Because when you do, because it's going to happen, right? You're going to get dispatched to a DWI and you're going to have to handle it.
Right.
And it's going to be 10 times harder for you versus I've already done 3 of these. I'm good. I'm going to go do this.
And, you know, oftentimes you'll see some of your officers that, you know, get that feeling and they start cutting corners and then they get caught up. And those are the same guys that complain about their department, or they're like, hey, I got screwed. We're like, well, did you really? Or did you cut a corner, right? Were you being lazy? I think what you said is great advice. Go learn how to do that stuff. And that's exactly why I give my phone number to new rookies. I'm like, hey, if you got questions, man, like I got a lot of answers, like call me. And if I can't give you the answer, I can tell you exactly where to find it, you know? And some people, that's what they need, you know?
Yeah. You just needed to develop, as a new officer, develop a level of comfortability doing the job. Okay. From just a personal perspective, you don't want to be like anxious and be like, oh man, I don't know how to do that. But also it's important because you're going to be thrown into these situations and you don't want to make mistakes, because that's a whole nother level of like, man, I didn't know. Like we were talking about before, when I asked somebody, what is it, not in particular, like what are officers doing that are getting them in trouble? And they just said like, they are doing things that they should not be doing, that are, you know, either against policy or a violation of like, you know, researching or this or that. And it's getting them in trouble and they should know.
Right. One of the things that I see wrong with most new officers is they'll take their call and they won't do anything more with it, right? They'll go sit in a hole somewhere. They'll go sit somewhere, type the report up, and then watch Netflix, sit on their phone, whatever. Whereas you're missing out on prime time to learn, right? Like there's so much going on out there. Go figure it out, you know? Go check out different things. Go take that call that you've never taken before. You know, go talk to people. Go learn your beat. Do you think about how many people still need to use a GPS after being in their beats for, you know, months or some people even years? Like, what are you doing? Like, go drive around. You know, that's one of the biggest things that, like we said, we could have this conversation for a whole podcast. I've never sat, my entire career, I've never sat in a parking lot. If I don't have anything to do, I drive around. When you drive around, you notice when things are out of place. You'll start to realize, man, there'll be businesses that you've never been in, but you know what employees drive like, because you can drive by the same parking lot all the time. You see the same car in the same spot, or you just notice things. And you'll notice the road conditions, and that'll help you out in a pursuit. Or when you're driving hot somewhere, hey, you know a bad curve's coming up. You know where the pothole is. You know certain things, and you'll never learn that sitting in a hole somewhere.
Yeah, good advice. Do you have any issues with sleeping problems?
Oh man, yeah.
I don't think, but you can't ask somebody who has the problem. Like, hey, how do you fix this problem? You know, it's like, well, hang on, I have the problem.
Yeah.
You tell me.
Yeah, I can't fall asleep till at least 3 or 4 in the morning, at least. Like last night, I probably went to sleep about 4 a.m.
Yeah. But I think, and I talked about this, I have a YouTube video on, you know, I don't say anxiety, but sleep problems or whatever, mental health. And for me, and this will be a whole episode someday, but I didn't ever have sleeping problems. I can fall asleep anywhere at any time. That's like, my problem is I'm too tired, you know? But when I was on night shift, that thing destroyed me. Like, I love the shift. I like the people. I like the work, but I didn't even realize that it was destroying me.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. It's like, and look, if you're listening to this and you're on night shift, you're like, man, I just love this place. I'm never going to day shift. You know, the people on day shift don't work as hard and they're not as fun. Dude, that's not worth it, dude. Like,
No, it's not.
and here's the thing that you need to understand. This is my advice to cops, is that, like, when you're a new cop and you're on the street, you think that whatever it is you're experiencing right now is going to last forever.
Right.
That's what I thought. I had a group of guys on the street that were fun to be around, and we were checking by and we were getting into stuff. And then, like, they started putting in for other places and leaving. I'm like, what?
Yep.
And so I'm like, oh, why did I pass up that opportunity? I could have put in for this and taken that other opportunity. So if you identify that early on, then, you know, maybe you make different career choices. But look, again, it's gonna be a whole nother episode, but you prioritize your family and your mental health and your physical health over the job.
Most definitely. And I'm definitely guilty of that, man. I'll go through waves of when I can't stop working 12, 14-hour shifts. You know, I'll work well into the night, not get home until, 4 or 5 in the morning, sleep until 1 or 2 in the afternoon, have to wake up, go right back to work. And then, I didn't get good sleep. I didn't work out. Like, I'm eating garbage. And, that happens like probably 2 or 3 times a year for me. I'll end up in a rut to where it's just, you just having too much fun at work. You're making money, you're chasing bad guys. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, all that. So, like, we all know that policing is not good for your mental health, certainly. I mean, suicides and things like that, alcohol, whatever people are into, you're not sleeping when you should, not only when you should, but how long you should. And when you're younger, you kind of don't care,
Right.
I mean, how old are you?
I'm 28.
So, I mean, whatever, you're kind of older, but when you're newer to the job, I should say, you lack probably the understanding that of the things that we talked about. But here's the thing, okay? Like, if you are having a good time at your job and you're putting all these bad guys, you're doing it, like, do it, have a good time, not saying not to. But what else are you sacrificing in the process?
Mm-hmm.
Because if I am 33 years old now and I am divorced, which I'm not, and how is that worth it? Like, nothing I did is worth that happening. And you're also your physical, mental health. I mean, I weigh like 150 pounds probably right now. At one time on night shift, I weighed 123 pounds.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a big dude anyways. Okay. So, it wasn't good. Like, I was having fun and I was doing all the things, but it was destroying me and I didn't even realize it.
Right. Yeah. Like I said, I run into those problems often. And I'm at the point where I'm looking to go to a day shift somewhere, right? Get on a more normal schedule. You'll see that, like, over time you start missing out on things. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with working evenings and nights for a little bit. But you got to know when to go, right? You got to know when to change it up. And especially if you get a family and kids and everything, it's no place to be. But at some point, like, I'm 28, like, I'm missing out on some stuff, right? Because all I do is spend my time at work, right?
Yeah, and so, I mean, I've had a little bit of everything in terms of shifts, but I had to be on evening shift for whatever that was, 2 or 3 months, whatever it was, and the shift was fine, working it was fine. Going in at 2 or 3 and getting off at 10, 11, and sometimes later was fine. It wasn't a big deal, but I only saw my kids 2 days out of the week.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I'm not going to say, like, I felt okay by that. I just was in it. Like, it didn't matter.
Right.
Like, it wasn't affecting me, so to speak. But now I'm on day shift. I see my kids every day.
Right.
And I'm like, dude, this is so awesome.
Yeah. It's got to be way better.
Yeah. So, like, my advice too, if you have kids, dude, make decisions in your career based on your family. And sometimes you have to sacrifice that, though.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe you're going to promote and it's going to take you, months of studying to do that, and you kind
Right.
of have to be away. And then you also know, well, if I promote, I'm going to get some job I don't want, maybe.
Right. You're gonna end up on night shift for
Yeah.
a while.
But hey, I'm willing to do all that to get to here.
Right.
That's okay.
Right.
And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm just
It's
talking
more
about
permanent decisions.
Yeah, I'm talking about willfully making decisions based on you. Like, man, I like these guys. I like this shift. I like this work.
Yeah.
This is about me. While your family is getting screwed,
Yeah.
you
yeah.
know, and you don't have to worry about that yet.
No, I don't. I'm free.
Good for you, man.
Yeah.
You may or may not know this, but this has been stopped a couple times probably, and issues with the video or maybe audio or whatever. Yeah, the trash guy came, and like growing pains, man.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't want to tell people I don't know what I'm doing. I try to make it look like I do. But thanks for listening to this episode. If you have any questions, you can reach me on Instagram, kineticconcepts_group. Make sure you're over on the YouTube, subscribing to that, kineticconcepts_group. If you want to be notified for upcoming training, head over to the website, kineticconceptsgroup.com, and subscribe to the site. If you're looking for training in Texas or elsewhere, send me an email, instructors@kineticconceptsgroup.com.
118, so this is my family all over. I can't copy. I want family all over. We got crews coming.